Chapter 3. The senior year English class I longed for turned out to be a sort of giftless Christmas morning. It was all due to my supposed teacher, Mr. Elmer Kingston, whose 1 foot, leg, and hip-in-the-grave agedness made learning impossible. If a man could snore while talking, he achieved the feat, and surpassed it by causing 17-year-olds to long for their mortal ending, far before middle age takes up the desire in earnest. Mr. Kingston, although teaching our mother tongue, could not stimulate the slightest interest in the beauty of language, or its seminal importance. We might have fared better with Jimmy Walton, and Jimmy Walton was as dull as a butter knife. In 8th grade, when our Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Winna Betherford Smithson, asked Jimmy to name the 10 Commandments in order, he stood and barked with the assured clip of a drill sergeant. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. As the snickering waned from his fellow schoolers, Mrs. Smithson gave it another try. No, Jimmy, I want to know what the commandments are, like, thou shalt not, etc. Jimmy paused, shuffled his feet, then scratched his nether regions, inexplicably causing a shouted epiphany to spill forth. Thou shalt not, etc. The snickering came to life again, and Mrs. Smithson, unable to recognize the futility, continued. Jimmy, what about loving God with all your money? He said, utterly bewildered. No, Jimmy. Now think really hard about this. Loving God with all your... Jimmy's face scrunched, like a 2-year-old working out something for their nappy, and said, money, etc.? With a tripled question mark of doubt. Jimmy's quirky confusion of all things religious made Sunday school most entertaining. I'm not sure if my understanding of the scriptures was flavored more by Mrs. Smithson's tutelage or the mess Jimmy's jumbled mind made of the Bible. After a dozen fruitful years as a Sunday school teacher, Mrs. Winna Betherford Smithson hung up the scriptures for a bit of drink. We're not sure whether Jimmy's thick-headedness played a part in her moral demise. There was talk she was spotted entering a most irreputable bar unaccompanied, then seen exiting said bar with a fellow whose form and features resembled not those of her husband's, Mr. Tynan Eustace Smithson, particularly his bulbous proboscis, which was the talk of all who beheld its cauliflower-snouted effect upon his otherwise pleasing profile. Could it be that Mrs. Winna Betherford Smithson forgot the 10 Commandments, especially good old number 6, as she entered good old room number 8, with bottle and fella in hand, at the foreshadowingly titled Hotel Marymount? Or was it simply an understandable escape from her spouse's freakish olfactorial chamber, whose every crevice, ridge, and oil deposit proved thoroughly unappetizing to a woman of her refined sensibilities? My other classes were typical that year. Math was math, you know. Take 27 from 102 and times it by 3, and you get a headache. History class was interesting, but it followed the lunch hour, leaving me a tad cross-eyed for a nap. Another difficulty: the only girl in school who captured an undivided attention moved away a few months after Maid Maggie left town. It seemed a great feminine drought had stricken the green hills of Maryland, leaving us male types howling at the moon. There were other attractive girls, but they flitted about, giggling and biting at their nails for sustenance. To be honest, I found myself wishing that I resembled a luscious nail, so as to be the recipient of a hungry nibble or two. Anything to tame the howling. The clearest example of this attractiveness drought arrived in the form of the girl who played opposite me in the high school play. You remember, the play in which I so dreadfully under-acted? As I looked deeply into her vacant eyes, Beatrice, a mousy, bespectacled little thing, averted her look slightly to the left, staring emotionlessly at my earlobe. And when I went in, as the stage direction required, for a kiss at the finale of the play, Beatrice tightened her lips. It felt as if I was romantically engaged with an old barn door. The audience's awkward laughter and hurried gathering of coats was the only review of my storied acting career. To further animate the problem with my English class, imagine a typical day with Mr. Elmer Kingston as your teacher. After the old man cleared his mucus-filled throat, he directed us to page 3 in our English books. Elmer the Explorer would then spend the next 5 minutes hitting the trail, so to speak, in search of his own misplaced book. The rediscovery always inspiring a meant-to-be under-the-breath, "Damn piece of dung book!" Dung book? The phrase had little poetry, but in terms of definitional accuracy, considering the quality of our English books, dung book was spot on. If one wished to have a bit of fun and get adoration from the peanut gallery, moving the elusive book to odd locales around the room while Professor Methuselah wrote on the blackboard was an act of mischievousness relished by the entire class. The old-time duration for fruitless searching was when Daisy Wilson, of all people, considering her father served as a deacon of the Baptist church, took the book and put it on the seat of Mr. Kingston's chair. From the moment he gargled another, "Turn to page," whatever, until he rediscovered his dung book, was possibly never. After wandering about in a circular stupor, old Elmer surrendered the search and phlegmily directed us to read the next chapter. The decrepit 900-year-old proceeded to sit right on top of the missing book, oblivious to his newly heightened view of the room. We looked every few seconds to see if the Kingston Bony Bottom had sent a message to the Kingston Bony Noggin to aid in the book's discovery. No such message was sent, or if it had been, had failed due to some impediments along the very dusty trail. About halfway through the year, a young woman named Sarah McKinley Cooper substituted for several weeks while Father Time recovered from a fall, in search of his dung book, no doubt. The first day of class, without so much as a greeting, she wrote the following on the board. "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster, which doth mock the meat it feeds on." She turned to the class, beheld a herd of bewildered, open-jawed illiterates, and pointed at me. "Please stand and read aloud the phrase on the board." I rose, determined to make an impression. "Oh, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster, which doth mock the meat it feeds on." "Do you know who said this?" she offered. "William Shakespeare," I said without hesitation. "Well, you're right in one sense. Shakespeare did write this, but it was the evil Iago who said it in the play Othello. How did you know it was Shakespeare?" "I know that Shakespeare is the greatest writer who ever lived, and only he could have written such words." "What do you think they mean?" Her voice challenged me, but her eyes were encouraging. "It's a warning. Jealousy fools, then devours you." She gave a smile, the radiance of which lighted my being. Thus began my days with the glorious hum of Shakespeare in my ear. I was under the spell and resided in a world of words, and how this Shakespeare magically put them together. When Mother said to me at age 12, Time for supper, Mr. Shakespeare. My knowledge of the bard was by name alone. Now, though often flummoxed, I was determined to solve the riddle inside his words, so I might one day reach a fluency and even write in such a manner. Miss Cooper asked the class to rewrite some famous lines to challenge our understanding of the language. This was a test I took to heart. Quote from Julius Caesar: "Cowards die many times before their death. The valiant never taste death but once." I rewrite: "Fear of dying makes death a companion. Living honorably makes death but an untimely guest." Quote from Hamlet: "To be or not to be, that is the question." My rewrite: "Take breath or breathe not, that is the query." Quote from As You Like It: "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." My rewrite: "We stride upon this earth as actors, taking up a part." Quote from The Tempest: "We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep." My rewrite: "We are larger than this life, yet finally we drift away." Miss Cooper read my rewrites to the class and gave me an A+. My success with the Shakespeare quotes was sadly short-lived. The brevity of the quotes made them easier than long narrative, which remained beyond my grasp. My mother became aware of my Shakespearean obsession and requested recitations. These moments were of particular delight. I could recite great lines of language, act a bit, and see the reaction on her face. When the ancient Mr. Elmer Lazarus Kingston rose again, Miss Cooper headed to Boston. She had a prime job waiting, but seemed sad to leave us. We could not believe that we had to suffer another 2 months of instruction from a dawdling sarcophagus. The day she left, she handed me a note and gave me a hug. I was one of only 3 who could claim ownership of a Cooperian hug. After all the discovery, effort, and growth, the old buzzard gave me a B. He didn't appreciate my, as he put it, over-imagination. What teacher discourages the imagination? I graduated high school, and the year began of such consequence that even a fellow with an over-imagination could never have imagined. When I opened Miss Cooper's note, I read the sentiment 3 times, then saved it in my wallet, where it still resides 40 years later. Some men see the stars as twinkling lights, while some, the rarefied few, see a billion worlds and take up their pens to write of the heavens.